Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining this week's panel conversation. I'm really excited to have our two leaders in law enforcement with us today, just to share ideas about how they're engaging with their community residents and community stakeholders during this crazy time that we're all kind of finding ourselves in. My name is Matt Fulton. I'm the Vice President for National Engagement for a company called Polco. We work with communities around engagement and performance. And we've designed these conversations really to just gather ideas about what's working for communities, and with the hopes that we can share them with people who are interested. We hope that you pick up a little bit of a perspective on what you might do in your world, either in local government or just simply as a community resident wondering about how law enforcement is being delivered in communities across the country. So thanks for your willingness to spend some time and listening to this. And I'm really excited about getting into the conversation. This is the way the day is going to kind of roll out. I will do a quick introduction of the panelists, and then we will get into the questions. I've got 3 questions that I want each of the panelists to respond to, all focused around engagement and how they're building connections with their community stakeholders. And then we will wrap it up at the end, providing some time for any questions or some additional comments by either of the panelists. And then we'll wrap it up. It generally takes about an hour, and depending on how good of a job I do in managing the meeting, we'll see how that goes. So with that, let's go ahead and introduce our panelists. Our first panelist is Chief Dave Norris. He joined the Menlo Park Police Department as a police chief in April of this year. As the 4th chief in 5 years, he found himself in an environment that really he needed to bring stability to the department and just kind of help address the public curiosity about progressive policing and reform during a really transformative period for law enforcement nationwide. Dave also spent 27 years with the San Mateo Police Department after getting his college degree and playing a little bit of minor league baseball. That was exciting to hear. While he was with San Mateo, Dave led the establishment of the department's community engagement strategy and elevated followership from a few hundred email subscribers to tens of thousands of community members across multiple social media platforms. It's really nice to have somebody with that background being part of this conversation. Chief Norris is a graduate of Post Command College and has a master's degree in public safety leadership. He's involved significantly in his profession, including the International Chiefs of Police, Police Standards, Ethics, and Image Committee. And he has served on many subcommittees creating scalable public engagement tools for large and small agencies. Chief Norris, thank you for being part of this conversation today. I would really welcome you to add a little bit more background and maybe share a little bit of experience on how your baseball team did.
Sure. So yeah, that was a great experience coming right out of college. I had just finished my bachelor's program, and I ended up going to a second university. I have 2 years at Miami of Ohio, and then I finished 2 years at St. Mary's College out here on the West Coast. And when you change schools, sometimes the credits don't move the same way that you would expect to move, right? So I ended up having the school tell me that I had to take all the lower division classes all over again as a college junior, and I said, well, no, I'm not going to do that, and I'm just going to go ahead and take the upper division classes. And so I walked in the spring of 1990, and I said, here are the classes that I've taken, and here's the degree that I've designed, and there's enough credits for it. I'd like to have my degree, please. And they said, okay. So I got my degree. I was actually offered a psychology research grant, a $2,000 research grant for the summer. And around the same time that I was offered that grant, I got a phone call from the St. Louis Cardinals saying, hey, we've drafted you in the major league draft, and we'd like you to come and play for the organization. And I said, well, what kind of a signing bonus are we? They said, well, we'll offer you $1,000, take it or leave it. And I said, well, I've got this $2,000 research grant, right? And they said, well, it's $1,000, take it or leave it. And they wouldn't match it. And I said, okay, well, where do I sign, right? Who wouldn't want to do that? And so I spent a couple of summers in the minor leagues with the Cardinals, one in Johnson City, Tennessee, and one in Springfield, Illinois. And then following that, the career ended, and it was, kind of back to finding my direction. And with a science degree, I ended up looking for something that I could use that science degree for. And my mom at the time was looking for a different job, found the city bulletin board and saw a job for, it was a non-sworn position. It was police service aide at the time, which was, evidence collection, parking enforcement, and some other things. And she said, well, this evidence collection thing, maybe that meets your science interests. Is that something you'd like to do? I had never thought about law enforcement as a career. And so I thought, well, and at that time we didn't have CSI, like that was long before CSI on TV. That was more like Quincy. But I said, yeah, that might be something that I could use my degree for, that'd be interesting, it'd be something different every day. As I got into that job, here I am, 6'5", well into the 200-pound range. I'm driving around with no gun, no badge, and I'm being trained by these full-time police officers who are looking at me and they're like, what are you doing? You need to be one of us. You're this big guy, you handle yourself well, like you need to be police officer. This is silly. So I ended up falling into peer pressure, taking the police officer test. And what I found was that the investigative method that we undertake as police officers and the scientific method that I had been used to working through my whole academic career were very, very closely aligned, and it fit my brain well. And I was off to the races at that point. And then, obviously, 17, 18 years later, after promoting up to supervision ranks, I decided to do something completely different than the first 17 years, which was all chase the bad guy stuff. I wanted to learn a little bit about the relationship between the community and the police, and a little bit about the relationship between the media and the police, and how that informed how we set policy and do business. And so I took on a job in community and media relations, and then spent the next 10 years really building that ability to engage with communities across multiple different modalities, and get a strong feel for how important that was. And that really led me into, wanting to do more in leadership at every step as I then continue to promote up to the chief position.
I think that's great. With that colorful history, the skill sets that you have around engagement is, I'm really excited about hearing about your experiences and what you're finding successful, just so that we can share that with others. So Dave, thank you for being part of the conversation and for sharing your background. Let me introduce our second panelist. Brian Peete is the chief of police in Montpelier, Vermont, where he leads a dedicated police department serving a daytime population of around 20,000 folks. Prior to his current role, he served as chief for the Alamogordo Police Department in New Mexico, as well as he's worked with the city of Chicago in the Inspector General's office as the chief forensic audit investigator for public safety, as well as the chief investigator in several other important roles. Chief Peete has served at the federal level in law enforcement in the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, and has actually had a couple of international deployments to Afghanistan in support of Operation Enduring Freedom, and in coordinating the U.S. and Afghan forces in over 150 counter-espionage and other types of missions. He has that significant military experience and has been responsible for the investigations and operations of over 400 special agents in a whole variety of worldwide offices. In all, Chief Peete shared that he has collectively managed over 1,000 people, 14 facilities, and over $1 billion worth of assets and operating budgets throughout his career and across the world. Chief Peete, thank you for being part of this conversation today. Would you mind sharing a little bit more about your background and anything that I may have missed?
Yes, sir. Hello, Matt. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here. Thank you very much for this opportunity. And hello, Chief Norris. It's pretty spectacular. I'm looking forward to learning more. Well, I started off my career as an aircraft maintenance officer, and then I cross-trained into the Air Force Office of Special Investigations after September 11th. And then from there to Las Vegas, then to Afghanistan, back to Vegas, then to regional headquarters. I got out and then I joined the Chicago Police Department as a blue shirt. So, and it was really good working on the West Side. And both of my parents, my mother retired off the job. My father was still on the job. We got a chance to work together. My brother is also a Chicago police officer, so it's a legacy type of an issue. And then just looking for different opportunities, opportunities to grow, learn more, and then looking more towards a family thing. Because at that point, that's when I got married and our daughter was born. So we were just looking for outside of the box opportunities. And then that caused me to go to banking for a little bit, anti-money laundering, but there wasn't a purpose. I didn't feel a purpose. It was a very good job, very good, great people, but there was a calling to me. So then I ended up going back to the law enforcement realm with the Inspector General's office. And then that was around the same time that the Chicago police was being looked at for the consent decree. So working through that, it just reignited a passion to go back to law enforcement, because I felt like, hey, my brothers and sisters are still out there, and and this was in the beginning of another up peak of the sentiment regarding law enforcement, and then the rightful expectations of a community and what law enforcement should be. And I wanted to get back into it. So I was able to go back to Alamogordo, which is where I got recruited for OSI at, and became the chief of police out there. And then from Alamogordo, I came up here to Montpelier.
That is great. What's really striking to me is in these panel conversations, the two of you are on opposite ends of the country, while pretty close in population, 20 and 30, 40. And I have found just in my city manager world, there's a lot of parallels to just simply the term, how do you engage? But it will be interesting today just to kind of learn what are the differences and how are you the same in terms of the way that you're engaging with your communities, given kind of your environments and all of the things that you're dealing with. So Chief, thank you for being part of the conversation. I'm really excited. This is going to be a really cool discussion. This is the topic that we're going to be sharing today. It's putting police needs and expectations into a community context. Throughout my career, as I have worked around leaders in law enforcement and kind of managing police departments, I really have gained just a super understanding and appreciation for the value, not only in protecting the public safety needs of the community, but everything that law enforcement does helps to build community and helps build that sense of community in all aspects and everything, all of the different service areas that a city is involved with. And so the role that you play as leaders in your departments becomes such a critical aspect of a community success. The kind of distinct difference, though, is when there are issues or conflicts that come up in the area of law enforcement, it becomes a really huge deal. So the responsibility that you have, it could be generational impacts on a community and how people feel trust in their local institutions, their ability to feel safe in where they live and where they visit. And so the role that you play on dealing with law enforcement and helping communities to succeed and being vibrant is such a critical thing. And then you throw on top of that the pandemic and all the civil unrest. There's just all sorts of different things that you're needing to contend with and to manage. And because of your world, which consists of always occurring, overlapping, evolving, adapting challenges, it really takes a special skill set to be successful in managing a police department and in engaging successfully with the community. We have a survey tool that has been getting a lot of interest from communities around the country. It's called the National Law Enforcement Survey. We administered it twice. It's really designed to help communities cut through the community noise that are currently impacting communities and get an accurate sense for where resident perspectives are around local policing. We administered this tool in 2018 and then again in 2020, essentially pre-George Floyd and post-George Floyd, just to try to figure out and understand where the shift in resident sentiment was around the delivery of police services. And the chart that I have in front of you kind of shares the shift in resident priorities. And overall, the list stays pretty consistent in terms of which one is more higher priority or lesser priority. But the two that I want to point out are kind of in the middle, where the priority levels actually increased, and that is increasing connection with the community and increasing resident accessibility to police. And that's what ties into this panel conversation, because we know that people, residents, stakeholders, community stakeholders are interested in having a closer connection with law enforcement and in kind of working with you on solving and addressing the problems that are confronting communities and individuals. And so that kind of spurred this conversation to happen, just to learn about how are you accomplishing that, and what are you finding successful, and what would you offer up to other folks who are in the business on how to deal with these particular topics. So there's three questions that I really want to pose to both of you. What role should the community play in guiding the delivery of police services? What strategies do you use for managing those expectations? I've had a lot of police chiefs tell me that once you understand the expectations, you have to be able to manage them, because you can't do everything overnight. And then finally, what tools and approaches and methods are you finding successful to understand what those expectations and priorities are, as well as how do you go about tracking your performance? And so with those three questions kind of in front of us, let's go ahead and kick off on the first question. And Chief Norris, I'd love to have you respond to this question first. Can you talk about the role that the community plays in guiding and influencing the delivery of police services in Menlo Park?
Sure, and this is a great topic for me, because I am hip deep in this right now as a new police chief. And what's interesting about my new role is we're in the same place of trying to figure out how we police differently in this new era, but we're about a year behind everybody else, right? So I come into this after really about a year of interim leadership in this organization, and interim leadership facing the community. And so now, I'm here, and I committed to my city manager. I said, I want to be here for 5 years. And so, you all are stuck with me. You're not going to have 4 chiefs over the next 5 years. And so I'm in a position now where I'm really trying to dig deep and find out what this community needs and how it needs this. And so I'll start by saying, one of the things that we do, I think, if you're a new police chief coming into a community, look at kind of census data, and you look at a little bit of the, what is the picture of this community? What is the education level? What's the median income? Kind of how does this community situate themselves? And if you look at the data, the majority of the data in Menlo Park, you don't get the full picture. And so I want to explain a little bit about that. So if I look at the data, what I find is a community that's got a very high median income, that's got a very high level of average education for adults. We sit in the middle of Silicon Valley, and there are, we definitely have a portion of Menlo Park that people live very comfortably, multi-million-dollar homes, people that have significant income. And so if you just look at the census data, at the kind of the majority data, you would get a picture that this is a city that would be very receptive to multiple social media platforms, that they would get their information by email and text message, be very technically savvy. Many of them are in like management level positions, so well-educated community, and you have the ability to articulate things maybe a little bit more complex. But in actuality, this is, people talk about Menlo Park as a tale of two cities. And those of us that are working in within the city organization and who are really connecting with the community refuse to look at it that way. It's all one community. But there is absolutely a portion of our community who is not that. They are, very low individual per capita income, very low family income, have significant needs and are significant fragile communities. There's portions of our communities where there are full neighborhoods that are majority minority neighborhoods. And so we have to really look at it a lot more holistically. We need to not just look at, well, we can push it out on social media and everybody will know. We need to get into the community. We need to have conversations. So we need to get in touch with the folks that we're looking to get in touch with personally. And so we really need to be very holistic with that approach, and that's one of the most important things that I've found. But how we connect with them, how we engage and gather that information, there's a lot of reputation that has been formed over the years that we're working through, because the city dynamic has changed quite a bit over the years. It's not the same dynamic between the police and the community now as it was, say, several years ago when it was much busier in terms of crime. But we need to rebuild and repair some relationships. There's definitely some people that have a very emotional reaction about their relationship with police that we need to figure out how we reach that and work to repair that. And even if it doesn't reflect how we practice maybe today when we send our officers out on the street, it doesn't change the fact that there are people that have kind of an emotional reaction when they see a police car rolling down the street, or an emotional reaction when they see a police officer who has stopped a person of color in those neighborhoods. And so we need to acknowledge that those emotions exist and that we need to address them. So one of the things that I've found that's been most important is to recognize the fact that there are folks who want to talk about that, but that they're worried that, the same worries that affect a lot of other police departments. And that is that the police are either going to be dismissive of their concerns and complaints, or that the police are going to somehow retaliate against their complaints. And one of the most important things that we need to do now is to make sure that we create a safe space so that those communities can talk about those trends and provide them to us, and not keep them, very generalized, where we can't make changes and address them in some way. So, kind of getting to the nitty gritty of that and creating a safe space to do that, probably one of the most important things that we need to do today.
Yeah, and I imagine just kind of given the, I won't call it instability, but the changes in leadership over the last half a decade definitely has an impact on the community externally as well as internally. And so I totally resonate with what you're suggesting and what you're focused on, kind of rebuilding those relationships and building that environment. Yeah, thanks so much. That was great. Chief Peete, can you share with us the role that the community plays in Montpelier in guiding and influencing police services?
Well, I think for us, we have our traditional path of what law enforcement should be doing. The type of services that law enforcement is supposed to be working towards is, reducing crime, the fear of crime, and then playing its part regarding making sure that a community is safe so that it can grow. But now more than ever, I was fortunate enough to inherit a department that the previous two chiefs were stellar in how they interacted with the community and how they involved the community and how they were part of the community. So it's a matter of picking up that flag again and then moving forward. But what our department, our community will set the tone for us. We push officers to go out and to be involved, and it creates a lot more things than that. It creates and it brings in buy-in from both sides, that everyone has something to say, everyone's opinions are being heard, and we keep away the us versus them mentality, whether it's the police department, circling itself against the community or from the community, and vice versa. So we're humanizing each other by putting each other out there, by finding out what everyone's priorities are, what everyone's wishes are, and then having those conversations about the anxiety that folks may be feeling. Or in our case, I think a lot of feedback that I've gotten is, I want to make sure that what I've seen in other communities during this entire situation does not occur here in ours. And so they're on guard and safeguard, and as they should be, to making sure that our departments don't move, and that we maintain a professionality, that we're responsive to our community. So our community dictates our vision, our mission, our priorities, and how we go about doing things.
I have to imagine, a lot of times when we get into these conversations, it sounds like you have Montpelier's got a history of engaging with the community. And so it's almost an expectation that the community has, and it's been existing for a long time. And tell me if this is true or not, but I always kind of recommend that when you do an engagement, you want to do it before you get into the storm. And because if you're trying to initiate it when you're in the middle of a crisis, you're not going to be successful. Having a community like Montpelier you've got that capital already built up with your community so that you have the ability to maybe do a little bit more in the work that you're doing. Is that a fair assessment?
That is extraordinary. I think that's true of any department of any organization of branding. Looking at it from the organizational psychology aspect of it, it's having those chips to cash in when something goes awry, when there's a strain on the relationship with the public, whether it's something that our department has been part of, or whether it's something that folks have seen elsewhere within the country. So building up that trust, building up that bank account, and then having to cash those chips out, that's huge, because we weren't in certain situations that other places may have been, with, huge calls for defunding, that then, demanding that several officers be fired. Just that entire stress or anxiety. Again, our push was, we had developed those interpersonal relationships with people within the community, not just community-wide, but statewide, legislatively as well. And so again, the focus was more along the lines of, how do we make sure that you all maintain the current path you're on, and what can we do to improve that path, rather than we need to tear down the entire system and rebuild it. So we were able to avoid a lot of that diversionary conversation.
Yeah, that's a great way of saying it, that you're really just checking in with the community to make sure you're always on that continual improvement path. Thanks.
Matt, can I add something very quickly to that?
Sure.
So, I think that Chief Peete is 100% right, and I know that you've had, you probably got something similar from a couple of my colleagues who you've had on here about, putting deposits into that bank of trust, and I think that part's very important. But there's also kind of a proactive piece that I've pursued over the last couple of months since I've been here, and that is being very observant of who some of the louder voices are within the community that have issues or concerns, or bring up some really important things to think about, that the officers in the organization might look at that and go, wow, that person has no idea, or they just don't get it, or they don't get how we police. But those voices are really important, because there are important nuggets in there that we need to capture. And what I found is to take those people one-on-one. And so if I hear a comment in, say, in a city council meeting, or we have an email thread that goes to all the council members as well as all the management staff within the organization, and I see a comment on there from a particular individual that I think, it might be good to have a one-on-one conversation with them. Invite that person, go sit and have a cup of coffee and have a conversation, so that I can learn a little bit about their perspective, and that will help us to kind of lay out a strategy that helps to inform the community better, because a lot of it is, misperceptions on the part of the public, or they're receiving information that's not correct, and we can attack that, but we have to address that correctly. And part of that is that, that one-on-one, like, look, as a police chief, I want to sit down and I want to hear what you have to say, but what you have to say will help us inform how we provide targeted information to the public that answers some of those questions that maybe there are misperceptions, or that there's something else that needs to be put out there by the agency to help the community feel informed and engaged.
Yep, that's a great point. Yep. Thanks for adding that on. Chief Peete, let me go to you for the second question. Chief Peete, can you talk about the strategies that, once you understand where your resident expectations and priorities are, how you go about effectively managing those expectations?
Through prioritizing them. So keeping track of all the feedback that we have, and then throughout these conversations with the community, find out those who are very engaged, and who want to be stakeholders in the process, and then bringing them on board with our department to help us move that needle into the direction that our community wants to see its police department go. So we would, I look at looking at everything, and then prioritizing what those demands from the community are. And then I'll meet with those stakeholders as well as my organization, so that way we have a mutual buy-in. As I can talk about 21st century policing to the cows come home, but my folks as well as the community need to have faith and trust in the things I say, so that we can bring these things to bear. So it's bringing that mutual buy-in by bringing everybody to the table, having the conversations, and then setting about how do we go forth to get these things? What are the best ways to do them? Because I can have an idea, and Chicago, we did this, Alamogordo, we did this, and OSI, we did that, but it may not work in Montpelier. And then again, those who are the most energized is putting them into the positions of responsibility, and then helping them to grow and foster them as leaders as well. And then they take that energy, and that energy becomes infectious. And so folks are, and it also answers the issues of recruiting and retention, or especially retention within our department, by putting people where they want to do the most good, and where they have the talent to do that good, and mentoring them to that point to get there. So it's prioritizing, it's bringing everybody in, and then finding out what we can do and doing that. And then the things that we can't do, often typical to due to budgetary constraints, is to find ways to make it happen. So one of the biggest things for me is, don't ever tell me there's something I can't do, because I'll find a way to do it. So that's a motivator to me.
I love the term infectious energy, because you're right. I mean, people like to be around a winner. And if you've got positive things going on in the community, people love to be engaged in positivity and things that are moving forward in a positive way. It sounds like Montpelier's got a pretty engaged, community partners are pretty engaged in community activities.
Yes, we do. We have a very active community, and it's sometimes it's a struggle keeping up with all the different social media platforms and outlets where everybody's expressing their information. But I have to try to find time to make sure I am part of that. And then one thing to add to that, I think that my role specifically is I don't have all the answers, and I never will. And any chief that says they do, that's a dangerous recipe. The issue, I think, is to empower the community and to empower our officers and our staff members and give them the strength and the push behind their ideas to make their ideas come true, because they always make me look like $100 when I'm wearing a $2 suit. So I owe who I am because of the people that I get to work for.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. That's really appreciate that. Chief Norris, can you talk about the strategies that you're using for helping you to manage community expectations once you know them?
Sure, and I'll start by there's a couple things I want to talk about under this. One is a theory that's both internal and external. I know Chief Peete was also talking about internal and external, because it really is it's a holistic team effort. It is everyone. The entire community. I was talking with someone from another agency just last week, and they have a mantra, and their mantra is, "We are the community." And I thought that was fantastic, because that really does encompass the fact that we're all in this together. But one of the things that I think is important for us as not just as law enforcement agencies, but internally and externally, I have two concepts called North Stars and Champions. So North Stars being, you set something that's very simple, straightforward, very easy to follow, that makes a lot of sense to everyone involved. Public safety in general is a great North Star. We have to do things to keep the public safe, or keep peace and order, be the peacekeepers in our community. And then the champions concept of that is, we as the police chiefs, and Chief Peete did a great job of expressing this, we as the police chiefs can't do it all ourselves. We have to do it as a team, both as the police department operating as a team, and then with the community operating in concert as a team. And the only way to do that is to develop champions within the community and champions within the law enforcement organization, so that the message is not just coming from the chief. The message is coming from those influencers in the organization or in the community. We're talking to the person on their right and talking to the person on their left, and making these concepts and these ideas real. That's the most important part of this, because we can stand there all day long and stand on the podium, right, and be the $100 guy in the $2 suit. But if it's just us talking and we're not getting the folks in our organization standing behind us and nodding and talking to their fellow officers when they're out on their coffee breaks, and the community members who are saying, no, I talked to the chief and I believe in this, that, and the other, and telling their neighbors, we're not going to get progress. So it has to be a team effort, but you have to develop your champions in order to do that. And then speaking, just specifically to some of the expectations that are laid out by the community, in California, we're really fortunate in the sense that we have very progressive, legislated, mandated changes that speak to a lot of those points that are on the national narrative. And I'll give you a very short example of that. So in a presentation that I made to the council, I committed a PowerPoint sin. I put a PowerPoint slide up that had 20 lines of text on it. And I said, I'm doing this on purpose. I'm doing this for a reason. I'm not going to read you all of this text. I realize that this is not the way you put up a PowerPoint slide. But these 20 points here of reference are the 20 things that SB 230, which is our latest legislation that talks about many different elements of police reform, mandates that our police officers and our departments do in terms of policy, performance, training, supervision, oversight, attention to certain at-risk communities, that covers a lot of the needs that are spoken about on the national narrative. And so it's important that our public understands that a lot of these things that we're talking about and that the public is saying, hey, we need you to do it, police departments are already doing it. So finding those things that we know that we're already doing and expressing those things to the public that sometimes don't know what we're doing, I think that's an important piece. And then being vulnerable enough to say, there are pieces of this that we still need to improve, and we're going to be working on those things. That's another important piece. And then also giving people something to look forward to and saying, look, there are future-facing parts of this that are a little bit further off in the distance, but we know we can achieve this, and we know that it meets the interests and the expectations of the community. You have to create that whole past, present, and future picture in order to get that community to understand that you are putting forth a lot of effort heading in the right direction.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there was just a ton of just great stuff that you shared, Chief, in that. I love the North Stars and Champions. But you also brought up what I think is really an important item, and that maybe give me some additional thoughts on this. So many times I think the public really, because their needs are being taken care of, public safety needs, they don't have to pay attention to what the police department is doing. And so they get elevated in their interest when something big happens in the community that's impacting them personally, right? Mm-hmm. And so what you shared about helping residents to understand that a lot of the issues that they're maybe worried about are already being addressed and taken care of by the police department. It's that whole notion of trying to make sure that there's enough connection going on so that they're aware of what you're doing, so that when the big flare-up happens, they're not going to overreact because they've got that relationship already built and the understanding already built. I don't know if that's a long way of asking you a question, but I'd love to get your perspective on that.
Well, there's a part of this that we should be conscious and bring in, and that is there's a lot of changes, a lot of legislative change that has happened over the last couple of years. There is a lot more that's coming. There are some bills on the governor's desk in California that are going to, add to the level of transparency, add to the level of accountability in police departments. There's a piece of that we have to acknowledge that, it makes our officers a little bit wary as well. And as police leaders, we have to make sure that we're managing that. And the most important part of that is, as we add in accountability and transparency pieces, what we're talking about is showing those things to the public that are the things that are outside the boundaries of what we expect of our officers. So if they're doing something that's outside the boundaries of what we expect, the public wants to be more aware of what we're doing. And so this is a better way for us to continue to emphasize to our personnel that they have to handle themselves professionally, and that they have to pay attention to their training, and that they have to make sure that they understand that all eyes are upon them, when they're in public. And so I established something with my team called that I call the 4 Ps. Like many agencies, our level of proactivity is a little bit reduced over this past year. Part of that is from the pandemic. Part of that is from just a lack of interest and exposure. So the officers aren't taking those extra steps that they would typically take as proactive police officers. And I said, look, pay attention to the 4 Ps, and that is prepared, professional, polished, and proactive. And if you can do the first 3, in other words, if you're aware of your training and you're well prepared, you are polished, you look good, you appear well to our community in all aspects, and you're professional, and you take your job seriously and your responsibility to the public seriously, then you have my full endorsement and encouragement to do the 4th part, which is the proactive part. Go out into the community. If something doesn't look right, it's your responsibility. We are the custodians of that for our community, and that's the expectation. And so, that's another way of kind of setting some North Stars for the community, for the department, and then being able to reflect those out into the community and say, look, we want our officers to be proactive and be out there, but we're going to give you these 3 things. We expect our officers to follow those things and to give you the best police officer that we can out on the street.
That's great, and that aligns so nicely with Chief Pete's focus on the internal retention issues. You give your officers pride in what they're doing and the work that they're performing for the community. Your overall department's going to be that much better for it. So yeah, thank you very much. Chief Peete, can you talk about the tools and methods that you're using for understanding what resident expectations and priorities are? And I particularly like to know how you go about tracking your performance.
So just to touch on like what Chief Norris had mentioned about empowerment and having his folks leading the way with and being, it's just phenomenal. It's a level of policing that I wish I would have seen when I was a blue shirt and everything else. It just sounds like a very good department to be in, Chief Norris. So my hat's off to you 100%. So and then it also brings me back up to your question. I think that there's no substitute. Even like Chief Norris had mentioned that in the middle of Silicon Valley, he thought he'd be dealing with some tech savvy folks and social media outreach, and I've come to find out pretty much the same thing. Folks will always say, well, I never knew about it. I never heard. And you can say, well, we put it up on the website, or we sent it out, or we put it on Facebook or Craigslist or Front Porch Forum, whatever it is, the platform, the folks aren't paying attention to it. And that's a good thing, because you had mentioned it before, Matt, that in our neighborhood is fortunate in the fact that as we're in this whole thrall of policing, when our agency had just, or our city had just asked our city council members what their priorities are, how are we going to, look at or tweak our strategic plan. And the 10th thing, they asked for 10 things. The 10th thing was just to ensure public safety. And that made me feel pretty good. It's like, hey, if I'm off the radar, I want to stay that way. But in getting that message out to the community and having that information, it's to empower our folks to push the message throughout interactions that we have, to make ourselves available, not just through, to say, well, we've checked the boxes and here I am, I put it on my website, but to get our officers and our staff members out there and talking with people and engaging with people, looking at in some of the things that we track when we look at promotional or leadership opportunities. We look at things like that's part of the, what we're looking at you as. How engaged are you in the community? And that adds certain, measurement points to a scoring rubric. So it's everything is designed to find the most creative ways and the most basic ways to get information out to the public and how to track it. Now, there are some things that we're looking at, like there's something out there, it's called Officer Survey. And it's a community engagement tool that we can send out information or questions to members of the public to gauge the level of interaction and what we're doing. It also has a platform in which officers, after they answer a call for service, they can hand that information to the person, again, depending on the sensitivity of the call, but the officers may be able to, or can hand this information to them, and we can get immediate feedback. on how that officer handled that call. So it also goes to Chief Norris's point about the 4 Ps and looking at the professionalism and how competent our officers are as they're performing the duties. So we try to track everything as best as we can with the technology available to us based on our budget. But I found that there's no substitute other than getting out and interacting with people face to face.
Yeah. Matt, can I add a quick thing to that? Because I think just to reinforce Chief Pete's point. So, I have moments where I call them the old Sarge moment. And that comes from, being that frontline supervisor where you're telling your team like, hey, think about it this way or think about it that way. And then something happens and they make a good decision based on what you talk to them about. And, see, the old Sarge was right. And so I had a moment like that with my team just a couple of months ago. So we were doing a reimagining public safety study session meeting with council. And the night before I was meeting with our labor association. And I said, here's some things that I'm looking at. I would really like to see us make some room in patrol staffing to get officers out on bikes. Our cops are really interested in doing that. We just did a bike certification program and they're into it. I said, I'd like to see us, find a way to get that more frequent on bikes, on foot patrols, more in connection with the community. And I said, and I'd also like to find, and I said, I'm not sure how we want to quantify this yet, but a way that we can quantify positive community contacts so that the things that we're collecting are not just arrests and traffic stops and things that are enforcement facing. I want some things that are community engagement facing that we can count. And I provided that to our POA. The following night in the community meeting, public comment, and I didn't put a bug in anybody's ear. Public comment was, let's find a way to quantify positive community contacts. Let's get officers out on bikes. Let's get officers out on foot and in connection with us because we'd like to see them and we'd like to have better interactions with your officers. And, an interesting thing happened. As we went into, that was on a Thursday night, as we went into the weekend, cops are in briefing at day shift briefing and they're like, hey, let's go grab those bikes and let's get out there. And nobody had to tell them to do that. Right. They saw that the chief was interested. The old Sarge was right when it came to the community meeting and feedback, and they went out there and they did it. And there's great feedback from the community that's coming from it, and our cops are really enjoying it as well.
That's super. That's super, old Sarge. Hey, Chief Norris, would you mind? Let's just kind of expand on that. Can you talk about the other ways that the tools and methods that you're using for engaging with the public and understanding what the priorities are? And I'd particularly be interested in how you're kind of tracking your department performance.
Sure. So we are still developing tools for tracking that are better than what we have up to this point. When I came in, there was very little in terms of surveys. A lot of agencies send regular surveys out to folks in the community based on, if a report was taken, then that address gets a survey in the mail, that type of thing. We didn't have a lot that kind of met my needs, so we're looking at ways that we can do that. And I like the ideas that Chief Peete has brought up in terms of sending an immediate survey out. I think we're looking for some text message tools so that if we're collecting cell phone numbers, we can send a text message and say, how did we do, and start to collect that data. But where we get a lot of our feedback is our neighborhoods here, and Chief Peete, I don't know how it is over there in Montpelier, but here, especially in Silicon Valley and right in the heart of where Nextdoor.com started, we are very flush with Nextdoor.com in a lot of our neighborhoods, and it is a little bit of a two-way. A double-edged sword, because some of those neighborhood conversations we as the public agency can't see unless someone forwards that information to us, but we can push a lot of information out very accurately to established households, as opposed to typical social media platforms where you don't know if you're pushing information out to bots or whether you're pushing information out to actual individuals who live in your community, or whether you're pushing it to anarchists who live out of state. And so Nextdoor.com is a very accurate tool, and there are some really good polling tools that go with that I'm interested in exploring. But before I do that, in looking at the way Nextdoor.com populates in our jurisdiction, I know that our fragile communities, our communities in need, have a much lower percentage of people connected to next door than our very comfortable communities on the other side of town. And so I have to be careful about that, right? I don't want to put something like that out there and pull all the people who like the police. I want to pull the people who have real needs that we need to pay attention to and fulfill, because I don't want it to be all positive facing. Hey, we love the police. The police are great. I want it to be, hey, this is how you could be better. So we're looking at ways that we can really take a task of that. In terms of public engagement, we push things out on nextdoor.com. We push things out. Actually, there are a lot of people on a listserv for press releases from the city. It's a city that's the population is very active with city government. And so we push things out in that direction. And then we have, various social media platforms, especially Instagram seems to be really popular for us. If we have something longer, we'll go through Facebook. And this is a longstanding practice here, that our PIO here in Menlo Park, Nicole Acker, sat down with me when I was a PIO sergeant, 11 years ago, and said, hey, what are you guys doing? And let me tell you about what we're doing, so that we could start to build that. And then fortunately, now I come to this agency as the chief, and I know that this is, a well-established and a well-structured public engagement platform, but we can always be better.
Chief, if you were going to offer up one suggestion to other police chiefs who are trying to get to their, how you call a fragile population, the kind of the harder to reach group, is there one thing that you would recommend?
To me, that champions concept is the most important piece. So that is, getting good face time. And during this pandemic, it's really hard to get good face time with the community, good like in-person interaction. But when you do those in-person interactions, you make connections with people who have a voice and also have some influence in the community, and making sure that you're establishing good relationships with people who have the influence in those communities probably is the number one thing, because that's that champion concept. You want the person who is gathering all of this information up, feels good about it, and is talking to the person on their right and the person on their left, or their neighbor on the right and their neighbor on the left, about these things, and also getting questions and feels that sense of trust with you as the police leader, to send you an email or send you a text message and say, hey, chief, one of my neighbors was brought up this point, what do you think about that? And you could do one of two things with that. You can answer that directly, and say, hey, this sounds like it's more of a one-on-one answer. Or you can say, you know what, this is so important that I want to put it on one of our media platforms and push it out to the entire community.
That's right.
Because this is a question that everybody's asking.
Yeah, that's super. Thanks for sharing that. I think that there'll be a lot of people that'll be interested in learning a little bit more about that. Well, this has been great. I would love to just kind of open it up if there's an additional point. We're getting towards the end of the hour, but if there's anything else that either of you would like to add to the conversation or ask each other, now would be the appropriate time to do that. Otherwise, I will kind of continue moving forward and on wrapping this up.
No, I would just add that it was for me personally, I really got to another stronger sense of just security, I think, of where the profession is, because of just listening to Chief Norris is just like, thank God there's other people out there that have that that desire to go back to the community, and everything that he's saying is not, it doesn't come across to me as like just chattering the boxes. It's actual compassion and what he needs or what he means for his community. And I think that it's been revigorating for me. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
And Chief Peete, right back at you. It's good to know that there are people who are kind of, we are championing that cause. And we get asked this question a lot, and I bet Chief Peete gets this question too. We're in a profession right now where lots of chiefs are leaving, deciding that this is now is maybe the right time for me to just call it a career and step out of the profession, because I'm not sure about what direction this is going. I think this could not be a more exciting time for people like myself and Chief Peete, who really want to make sure that this profession that we love and the people who are in it get through this kind of this difficult period over to the other side. And whatever that new vision, that new generation of policing looks like, we need to be able to support our officers who are going to be, pushing forward and providing, peace and order and public safety to their communities in the future. And this couldn't be a better time for us to, take the reins and help that along.
That is very well said. I tell you, as I listen to you guys and as I just kind of reflect on the other panels that I've been part of, I'm feeling myself having that infectious energy as well. I'm missing my city manager days of making communities work and excel. Let me, well, first of all, thank you for being part of this conversation. Let me just kind of capture a couple of words that I wrote down as you both were talking. You each come from different community dynamics, but you're all living within and working around and adapting to the needs of those dynamics that are in front of you. But both of you are talking about the importance of humanizing the delivery of the services that your law enforcement officers provide. And then also kind of adding on to that, paying attention to those internal needs of the officers for retention purposes and for really helping them to be proactive and successful in the work that they're doing. The 4 Ps, Chief Norris, that you talked about, I really love that because it really does lay out kind of the broad boundaries of what you want any law enforcement officer to provide for a community. I totally agree with both of you about the importance of community partners and finding those trusted voices that can help connect with those minority, hard to reach, marginalized populations that are in the community. I think that's just such a critical thing. And the community partners, many of those partners already are running the community in informal way anyways. And so building those relationships, I think, really glad to hear both of you talking about that. Being vulnerable, demonstrating, building that trust, relying on the power of the folks that are working with you and around you to support the roles that you have as leaders. Great comments. The champions and North Star concept is something, Chief Norris, that you can be certain I'm going to be using that in the future as I talk to others. So thanks for sharing that. This was a great conversation. I really valued the thoughts that you shared. So just kind of as a thank you in finishing this up, I will follow up, make sure both of you have contact information for each other. Chief Norris, you came to this panel as a recommendation from another nearby chief. So I appreciate the power of reference. And so if either of you know of other chiefs that would benefit or have interest in this kind of a panel conversation, I would really welcome it. You'll start seeing the highlight segments show up on LinkedIn probably within a week. And one of the things that I ask is that share it with people in your network, because people who trust in your opinion will really value and benefit from your perspectives and get that same infectious energy that you talked about today. This is a great conversation. I really value these conversations, and the benefit for me is I get to meet 2 great guys, 2 leaders in the profession from across the country every week, and today was no exception. So thanks for the time. Thanks for what you're doing. Best of luck with everything that you're doing in this really challenging world that we live in. Based on what you shared today, you're both on a good trajectory. So thank you very much.